All right, I'm in the Gospel of John, chapter 11. I'll be finishing up chapter 11 in this message. And what has happened is that Jesus resurrected Lazarus from the dead. And the response was that the high priest convened a meeting of the Sanhedrin with the chief priests and a bunch of Pharisees. And there was a decision that was made that Jesus needed to die. That was their decision, that they were going to murder Jesus. All right, so I'm going to begin in verse 47, John chapter 11, verse 47, where it says, "Then the chief priests and the Pharisees gathered a council and said, 'What shall we do? For this man works many signs. If we let him alone like this, everyone will believe in him, and the Romans will come and take away both our place and nation.'" All right, so there was a concern that if they didn't do anything to stop Jesus from doing what Jesus was doing, that there would be consequences. And the consequence here is that the Romans who are in charge there, they're going to come and they're going to remove the high priest and the other people who are in positions of authority there, and they're going to probably just replace them with somebody else. All right? Now, the history of the Jews and the Romans, how the Romans got in there, it's kind of awkward because there was so much corruption going on in the Judaic kingdom that resulted from the victory of the Maccabean Wars. There was the victory of the Maccabean Wars, and then as there was new leadership being set up, there was a tremendous amount of corruption and difficulties and problems, and so the Romans actually came in and did the people a favor from a certain point of view and brought order back to the region. But now, this is the way things are presently, that we now have a system that's in place, and it is going to be disrupted because of Jesus. So the leaders are saying that they're going to have to be proactive with regards to this, and they're going to have to do something. Verse 49, "And one of them, Caiaphas, being high priest that year, said to them, 'You know nothing at all, nor do you consider that it is expedient for us that one man should die for the people, and not that the whole nation should perish.'" All right? You people don't know anything. That's effectively what he said. He said, "You people just don't get it. You don't know anything. You don't realize that it's more convenient for him to die than for the whole nation to be at risk." All right? That the whole nation is going to be at risk, not just our jobs. But there's even a bigger risk, and that it's better for one man to die, for Jesus to die, than for Jesus to die and everybody else die along with him. All right? So you guys are just not paying attention to the situation. Jesus is dead, all right? He's going to die. He's resurrecting people. That sounds a little awkward, doesn't it? You've got the guy who is resurrecting people from the dead, and you want to try to kill him? They're just not thinking, all right? They don't get it. They don't know anything at all, obviously. But they say, "You people don't know anything at all." All right, we're going to have to wait a little while for that revelation to show up. And that it is better, or it is convenient, or it is expedient that he should just die himself and not for everybody else to suffer along with him. But then in verse 51, it's recorded, "Now this he did not say on his own authority, but being high priest that year, he prophesied that Jesus would die for the nation, and not for that nation only, but also that he would gather together in one the children of God who were scattered abroad." All right, so let's start with verse 52. We have a clear description here that Caiaphas is a prophet. Right? That's what it says. He prophesied. This is who we have. We have Caiaphas, the high priest, who really isn't the legitimate high priest. He's the guy that was appointed to be the representative of the interests of the Romans. He's not there representing the interests of God or the people. If he does, that's okay, as long as it doesn't contradict with the interests of the Romans. And he's now identified as a prophet. All right, he prophesied. So we have Caiaphas, the evil guy, who's suggesting that we commit murder. He's now going to be understood as being a prophet. That's what we have. All right, that's what we got. All right, he prophesied. There you go. That from that point of view, you could say that he is a prophet. Now, I don't think that he has a relationship with God. And that was a way of differentiating between the prophets and the priests. The prophets had a relationship with God. The priests didn't. The prophets would have conversations, dialogue with God, which in general was to receive the instructions that the priests would follow. In general, that was the case. Or that through this conversation, God would reveal to the person things that would come in the future, and he would want them to write it down, to notify people, to document this, to make it clear and obvious. All right, but however that's described, it can be summarized to say that the prophet had a type of relationship with God. There is no indication here at all that Caiaphas had a relationship with God. All right, so how he got this prophecy, if it really is to be described that way, which I don't think I need to go that far and to say that this is something that God gave him directly. But you never know, all right? We don't have enough information to really be sure exactly what would have inspired him to say this as a prophecy. I personally don't think that Caiaphas was thinking in terms of a prophecy at all. All right, I don't think so. But this is how it's recorded, all right? John recorded it in this way, without Caiaphas' knowing, without his understanding. He became Caiaphas the prophet who has prophesied what Jesus would do. All right, now, you see, you got to understand just how awkward this is. Caiaphas is suggesting that we need to murder Jesus. This is what he's suggesting to the council. That Jesus needs to be murdered, of course, because they personally are at risk. This is a decision based on their personal self-interests. It has nothing to do with God. It has nothing to do with the work that he is doing through Jesus. It has nothing to do with the new covenant. Nothing to do with any of that at all. All right? It only really has to do with his self-interest. And then he goes on and he says, that it's okay because this is how, in effect, we're going to save the people, right? You know nothing at all, nor do you consider that it is expedient for us that one man should die for the people and not that the whole nation should perish. Now, this is a little different than what he said before. The Romans are going to take away our place. All right? This was self-interest, and now he's going to cover up his self-interest. He's going to pretend that this has nothing to do with his own personal interests. All right? He's going to pretend that that's the case, and he's going to say that this is about the people. All right? This is about the people. Okay? That one man should die for the people. And that we're going to be the ones who are going to kill him, who are going to murder him for the people. All right? All right? And so this is how Caiaphas is effectively presenting himself after we all understand clearly that this really is just about his own personal self-interest. He's going to cover it up. All right? He's going to cover it up and pretend. He's going to live in his imagination, live in his fantasy, all by himself with these few others with him, I suppose. but he's going to have this fantasy. He's going to have this imagination that he's doing this for the people. This is for the public good. That's what this is. All right, that Jesus needs to be murdered for the public good, for the people. All right, we're doing the people a favor. We're going to save the people. That's how far he goes with this delusion that he's got. He's got this delusion to the extent where he's saying, Caiaphas the prophet, he's saying that he is now the savior of the people. All right? That's how he's gonna advertise this, right? He's gonna advertise this as, I'm just looking out for the people. I'm just here to save the people, the nation, the whole thing. It's all on me. I am the one. Yeah, right. And so that's what he's doing, okay? He's saying that it is good that Jesus dies for the people. And I'm going to be the one. I'm going to be the one to be, the instigator of this, the one who presents this, at first, and I'll be a participant. However I can, I'll help out, And in this way, they are going to be the saviors of the nation of Israel, the saviors of the people, because they committed murder. All right, that's the deal. That's the way things really are. Okay? No matter how they may pretend otherwise, this is the way things are. So in verse 51, now this he did not say on his own authority, right? This could be argued, I suppose. Caiaphas might want to say, well, it was on my authority, and then I suppose when he goes and sees God, as I mentioned in the previous message, that he's going to go, he could very well go before the Lord and say, but Lord, because of what I did, everything worked out great, everything worked out well. So you owe me, give me a place. I know you got some extra rooms down the hall, right? There were some people who probably you were preparing a place for them, and then I guess they rejected you, or maybe they weren't really saved or something. You made a mistake, and so that's okay. Don't worry, I'm here to help you. You can do a remodel, you can do a remodel and make it custom just for me. And so because I performed this service for you. I murdered you, all right, or I was a part of you being murdered so that I could save the people. And because you were murdered, you saved the people. And, you owe me. All right, you owe me. And this is not likely going to go well either. This will be another delusion, another form of fantasy, another one of these moments of him living in his own imagination, if that's what the conversation turned out to be. All right, but that he prophesied that Jesus would die for the nation. Okay, and in this way, because Jesus would die for the nation, in this way, there would be the means by which the people would be saved. He would die for the people, not for himself. He's going to give his life for them. That's what Jesus did. And when he did that, he provided forgiveness. All right? He provided forgiveness. So, from a historical point of view, through what Jesus did, God has now forgiven the world. He died for the sins of the world. Right? That's what he did. So the sin issue between man and God came to an end when Jesus died on the cross. From that perspective, from that point of view, that was it. Okay? That was the end. God no longer holds our sins against us. God was in Christ reconciling the world unto himself, not holding our sins against us. Now, what is he doing? Is he like holding on to forgiveness? Like it's his special package that he's got held tight to his chest, and he's saying, okay, now I've forgiven you, but you can't have it. You can't have it until you accept what I did. We'll come up with a list of criteria to say that you believe it, and things like that, and then God will be free to forgive them. But until then, no, God is not allowed to forgive. He can't forgive. He must be angry. He must be upset. He must have an attitude of some kind. All right? He must not relate to them in any positive ways whatsoever until they comply. And until then, he's going to have to hang on to all of these sins. That's what a lot of people want to believe. I don't share in that belief. I believe that he just forgave. And as far as he's concerned, this is not a topic anymore. This is over. All right. Now, there is great risk in this from a lot of theological perspectives that exist, because the majority of people who are in the Christian world, the majority of the people believe that forgiveness is salvation. That's what salvation is. Salvation is getting forgiven. That's what most people are saying. But I take a different point of view, all right? If you want to believe that, you can do that, of course. I'm not going to get in your way. But I, have a different opinion, and that is that salvation is the restoration of life. Salvation is the restoration of the Spirit of God. Salvation is being made spiritually alive. Salvation is being made into a new creation. Salvation is being made into a child of God. And that happens through being created, through being recreated. And forgiveness makes this possible because, according to the law of God, if we were to sin after being made alive, then we could die. He could depart. So the sin issue is resolved first, once and for all. And then he offers, do you want to be a child of God? Do you want to be a new creation? Do you want to be resurrected from the dead? Do you want to be made alive? All right? Do you want that? Do you want to have your God dwelling within you personally, such that you will now have an eternal relationship with him as a person? Do you want that? And that is what is being offered. That's the good news. That's the gospel. The free gift of life that will remain within you eternally. All right? It is an eternal life, and you will be alive eternally, even after your flesh physically gives out and dies. All right, so when Jesus dies for the people, all right, we don't have to separate this in some way and say, well, he didn't die for them until they said that they were okay with it. It doesn't say that. That's not what he did. He died for the people, and not just them, but for the entire world. All right? Because the way that the new covenant is defined, a person becomes a child of God not because of their genealogical heritage. All right? It doesn't matter who your parents were. What matters is whether or not you are going to believe the truth of the gospel. And anyone can believe the truth. Therefore, anyone can be saved. So, he died for the sins of everyone so that everyone would have an opportunity to be saved. Again, in verse 52, and not for that nation only, but also that he would gather together in one the children of God who were scattered abroad, who were just out there. He could bring all into one. And what is the one, right? That he would gather together in one the children of God. All right, gather together in one. Well, he is the one. We have our God who is the one, gathered together in one Messiah, in one faith, in one life. All right, the children of God. How do they become children of God? They become children of God by responding to the gospel and by receiving the free gift of life eternal. All right, of the life of God. That's how they become a child of God and are therefore one in him, as we are all one together. Both the Jew and the Gentile. All right, the Jew and the non-Jew. That's how that's better understood. But it started here. And, in fact, it took a while before it was recognized that a Gentile could be saved without first becoming a Jew. You read about that in the book of Acts. It took a while to figure that one out. Acts chapter 10, Acts chapter 11 was about the recognition that others could be saved without first converting to Judaism. All right? This is a way of understanding that those scattered abroad, those others, not just those who are of Israel, but anyone who is physically alive can become a child of God, can be granted repentance unto life. All right, unto life. All right, so that's what Caiaphas had to say, right? In verse 53, from that day on, they plotted to put him to death. Therefore, Jesus no longer walked openly among the Jews. All right? There's no real need for him to do that anymore. He's already done more than enough openly. So, at this point, there is a clear change in the way that he is going to conduct his ministry. He's not going to walk openly, but went from there into the country near the wilderness to a city called Ephraim, and there he remained with his disciples. And the Passover of the Jews was near, and many went from the country up to Jerusalem before the Passover to purify themselves. All right, now what's going on is that Jesus has gone off into the region of Ephraim. He's somewhere out there. He eventually makes his way to Jericho, from what we understand from Luke chapter 19. That's where he goes. He leaves Jericho and goes to Bethany from there, which is quite a distance. And I'll come back to that in a little bit. But while he is there are people who are going to come for the Passover. And they're coming from out of town. All right, they're coming from the countryside. And they're coming in for several reasons. It says here, for purifications. All right, now there is no official requirement for them to be purified because the Passover is near. That's not really a part of the law. However, there were many opportunities for a person to become ritually unclean or for there to be a purification of some kind while they were out of town, and it would have been inconvenient for them to go to Jerusalem, to the temple, to perform these purifications. All right, just because it's out of town, and it's a long ways. Some people could be walking for 2 or 3 days, or even longer, and they've got a home that they're going to leave behind. They might have livestock that they're going to leave behind. They have family there. There's a lot of responsibilities. They have their work to do. Okay, leaving town to go to the temple in Jerusalem is not a small thing. It just isn't. So when the people would find themselves in a circumstance where they would need to go to the temple, they would often delay. If they could, if the law permitted for them to delay, they would delay. All right? And then at the appointed time when they were required by law to physically be present, they can just go then. All right? So the people coming from out of town to perform these purifications that are referred to here for the most part, these are people who are going to the temple to just kind of get up to date. They're going to get up to date with their purifications that they have delayed, that they have stalled on, because it's a big trip. It's a long ways to go and take care of these things. And so they would wait until they have to go anyway. All right? And so this is the time for these people to go. And it would be a good idea for them to maybe come a day or two earlier, because there's going to be a lot of people there. There's going to be a lot of people coming in from out of town with the same thing in mind, that they got to get caught up on all their purification stuff. And it's probably going to be busy there at the temple. There's going to be some lines. They're going to have to wait. This is going to be complicated. Okay. In addition to that, they're going to have to find a place to stay. And it's difficult to find a place to stay when you're coming in from out of town. And the whole country is expected to be there in town. The availability for lodging is going to be limited. So it's a good idea to get there maybe a little earlier and find a place where you can set up. Find a place that you can rent, and so that you can get set up, you can get your supplies, you can get organized, maybe relax from the trip a little bit, go do some of these purifications and catch up on your ceremonial and sacrificial rituals, and then you're ready for the Passover. All right, there's more to it than just that. What about the lamb? You've got to select your lamb on the 10th day of the month. Now, if you're way out of town, do you really want to drag that lamb along with you? All the way from who knows where for days? And this lamb has to be one without blemish. You got to take care of this lamb carefully during the trip. What happens if it gets injured? Now you're in real trouble, all right? And so they would get there early, before the 10th day of the month, and so on the 10th day of the month, they're already set up. They got their place, they got their supplies, they've caught up on their rituals. It's just time to go ahead on the 10th day of the month to select your Passover lamb. All right, that you've got to select, and you will have hopefully secured a nice place for that lamb to hang out until the 14th day of the month, when this lamb is going to be sacrificed to the temple. You're going to bring it to the temple. You're going to sacrifice it at the temple. And that's what you and your family are going to eat that evening. The lamb roasted by fire, bitter herbs and unleavened bread. And that's going to be your Passover meal. And then for those who stay around for the 24 hours later, that will be the first day of the Feast of Unleavened Bread. And that is what people recognize today as the Passover Seder meal. That was 24 hours after the Passover meal that Jesus and his disciples participated in. But I'll come back to this later as we approach those sections. So these people are coming in from out of town. Verse 55, and the Passover of the Jews was near, and many went from the country up to Jerusalem before the Passover to purify themselves. And as I mentioned, there would be a lot of other reasons why they would want to get there earlier. Then they sought Jesus, referring to the leadership. They sought Jesus and spoke. Oh, I'm sorry. This would be everyone. I made an error. Okay. I was thinking ahead. Then they sought Jesus and spoke among themselves as they stood in the temple. What do you think? That he will not come to the feast? What do you think? Is he going to be here? He's not walking among us openly anymore. He left town. Everybody knows by now that the authorities are looking for a way to murder him. Murder this guy who resurrected people from the dead. Hey, do you think he's going to show? All right. Now, this is kind of an awkward question. Because of course he has to show. Of course he has to be there. That's the law. That is the Mosaic law. And if Jesus fails to show up in Jerusalem to observe the Passover one time, the law is explicit. It says that you are to be cast out from the nation. That is it. You are exiled. You are no longer recognized as a member of the nation of Israel if you miss your Passover one time. All right, so for all of those of you who say that to be right with God, you have to obey the Passover, chances are you've already blown it. You probably missed one Passover in Jerusalem. The law does say that if you're too far away, you've got an extra 30 days to get there. All right. That's enough time to get a discount on your travel expenses, isn't it? So don't, you don't have an excuse with that either. You get an extra 30 days, you could go. So that's the deal, all right? What do you think? Is he going to show up? Of course he's going to show up. If he doesn't show up, then the religious leaders will be able to say that Jesus has violated the law. He is no longer a member of the nation of Israel. There's no way that he can be the Messiah. He's not considered to be a Jew anymore because he failed to go to Jerusalem during the Passover. He blew it. He sinned. He is evil. He is to be cast out. Cast him out. Exiled. Let him go. Now all of our problems are now solved. We don't even have to murder him anymore. We can just send him out of the country. He can just go to some other country, somewhere else, never to be heard from again. Thank you very much. All right. So what do you think? Is he going to show? Of course he's going to show. Of course he's going to show up. Absolutely. Right? He's not going to miss this. Verse 57, now both the chief priests and the Pharisees had given a command that if anyone knew where he was, he should report it, that they might seize him. All right, so they issue their decree that if you know where he is, you better tell on Jesus. You better report it, because if we find out that you knew that Jesus had, he had snuck in, you knew that he was here, you saw him and you didn't report it, we find this out, well, we're going to say that you're evil too. You're one of his. You're one of his disciples. You're a great risk to our nation. You're gonna kill off the people. You're gonna be a part of the destruction of the nation as a whole. The people will not be saved because of you. All right. This is how far they could go with this. So they give this command. They give this edict. If anybody knows where he is, make sure that we can find out so that we can seize him. And they could probably even falsely accuse somebody. Hey, you knew where he was. Yeah, you knew. So here's a fine. You pay this fine, and we'll be okay with that. Right? There's a way to make money off of that, right? Lots of criminal activity can erupt from this kind of an edict, from this kind of a decree. So the people are not kind of in an awkward circumstance, aren't they? Now the people are now responsible for Jesus. If the authorities are able to seize Jesus or not, it's now the responsibility of the people. Now that's what they do. They order, we now command that you are responsible for making sure that Jesus gets seized. And if you fail in your responsibility, well, we're going to come after you with our authority. That's a disaster about ready to happen. Okay, but this is what this means. How does Jesus handle this? I'll tell you in advance, even though I'm not there yet, but I'm going to get there, and I'll tell you what's coming. Jesus is going to show up in town. He's going to walk, he's not going to walk in, he's going to ride in on a donkey, all right? Not on a horse, on a donkey. He's going to come right in a public way on the 10th day of the month, all right? He's going to show up just like that. Anybody want to say where he is? There he is. Okay? Go get him. Go get him. And the leadership did not go get him. So Jesus set everyone free from this decree to tell where he was, because there he was. All right? So Jesus solved the problem for everyone, that this burden was placed on them, this responsibility that was imposed on them by the leadership. He did everybody a favor when he did that, but I'll come back to that a little bit later. So what happens next? Verse 1 in chapter 12. We have chapter 12. We go into chapter 12, and after all of this stuff has been set up, all this stuff is coordinated, it's time for Jesus to come back to town. All right? Time for him to come back to town. It says in chapter 12, verse 1, "Then 6 days before the Passover, Jesus came to Bethany, where Lazarus was, who had been dead, whom he had raised from the dead." All right? And then they had dinner together. Now, I have to spend some time with verse 1, and I'm going to do this for the rest of this message as it relates to accounting for the 3 days and 3 nights that Jesus was in the grave. This is a verse that has some significance related to that. If you consider 6 days before the Passover, he showed up in Bethany, and then we know that the following day, if you go down to verse 12, it says the next day. Following day, he goes to Jerusalem. And in accordance with what we know, we can pretty well figure out that he arrived in Jerusalem on the first day of the week. It was a Sunday. And so on Sunday, it was 5 days before the Passover, if we consider chapter 12, verse 1 in this context. All right? If we consider that, then we can just do a count from there, which is what a lot of people will do, is they will say that Sunday was 5 days before the Passover, Monday was 4, Tuesday was 3, Wednesday was 2, Thursday was 1 day before the Passover. All right, so it happened Thursday night. Jesus was crucified on Friday. And then he was in the grave for 3 days and 3 nights, which would not take you to Sunday, but that's what people will traditionally do. All right, so if we start our count of 6 days before the Passover, according to John chapter 12, verse 1, and John chapter 12, verse 12, if we start it that he arrived in Bethany on Saturday, and then the next day, on the Sunday, he went into Jerusalem. It was the first day of the week. If that's the clock that we use, we end up with a Friday crucifixion, which doesn't give us 3 days and 3 nights. All right, no matter how many ways that people have tried to do all kinds of calendar gymnastics in order to get 3 days and 3 nights between Friday and Sunday, it really just isn't there. Okay, it just isn't there. What happens is that people give an explanation, and then they walk away, or they're no longer accessible for questioning, and then supposedly that makes it correct. Okay, that's usually how it works out. There's also so much tradition and everything wrapped up around that people in general just don't want to let it go, and they handle it by saying, we're just not going to go there. Okay, that way they don't have to let some things go. But there are some issues related to this that I think a person needs to be aware of. When you look at verse 1, chapter 12, verse 1, that he arrived 6 days before the Passover in Bethany. All right, now the first thing that needs to be mentioned, that's probably the most important as it relates to this, is that at no time did John record the claim that Jesus was going to be in the grave for 3 days and 3 nights. At no time did John record that. Jesus did say this, it's just that John didn't record this. Okay, Matthew recorded this. It was recorded in other places. So if we were to look at John to give the evidence to support the claim, and yet he didn't make the claim, this just isn't appropriate. All right? It's not appropriate to use the Gospel of John in order to support the claim that Jesus made that he would be in the grave for 3 days and 3 nights, it's not appropriate to use it to that absolute, in that absolute sense, in that absolute way, because John never did make the claim. Another thing to keep in mind is that John did not necessarily write his gospel in chronological order. The only gospel writer who stated that he wrote his gospel in chronological order was Luke. In fact, that's what he said about why he wrote it. If you read through the Gospel of Luke, at the beginning, he explains to his friend Theophilus that he's writing this so that Theophilus will know all that happened in order. All right? Not just what happened altogether, but what happened one thing after the next. Luke was the only one who made that claim. So we have to keep these things in mind when it comes to accounting for the 3 days and 3 nights and maintaining our chronology and looking for evidence that would support the claim and the fulfillment that Jesus did in terms of being in the grave for 3 days and 3 nights. There's another thing to keep in mind here, and that is that according to Luke, in Luke chapter 19, we know that Jesus went from Jericho to Bethany. We know that that was the trip that he made, that was his travel. Okay? And in making that kind of a trip, this is a big distance. This is a substantial distance. All right? If you consider the elevation, for example, I have this recorded in my notes. The elevation of Jericho is somewhere around minus 853 feet below sea level. All right? 853 feet below sea level. That's a minus 853. And Jerusalem is somewhere around 2,133 feet above sea level. We're looking at a distance of pretty close to 3,000 feet. That's a lot of distance to climb. Okay? And this was a one-way trip. Okay? So if we consider that Jesus went from Jericho to Bethany and climbed a change of elevation of 3,000 feet, all right, and this is not a simple thing to do on foot. As he did this, we can also include the fact that he would not do this on the Sabbath day. All right, he wouldn't do this on the Sabbath day because he would violate the Sabbath law. To leave his dwelling place, obviously, and not come back on the Sabbath day, and to make this kind of a trip, which definitely is going to be work, all right, it's highly unlikely that this took place on the Sabbath day. So for him to arrive in Bethany after making this kind of a trip, it would have been on Friday, before 3 stars were visible in the sky Friday evening. That would be when he would arrive. And that would be 6 days before the Passover. Saturday is 5 days before the Passover. Sunday is 4 days before the Passover. It's the 10th day of the month. That is when the Passover lambs were selected. That was when the people were coming into town to select their Passover lambs. If they didn't bring the lamb with them, that was the day. And when Jesus came into town on that day, and the people embraced him in the way that they did, that was a form of fulfillment of the laws of Passover related to Jesus being the sacrificial lamb, or the Passover lamb. The Lord Jesus, our Passover, okay, he was selected on the 10th day of the month in accordance with the law, and he was crucified on the 14th day of the month in accordance with the law. All right, the 14th day began at evening on Thursday, and the 14th day continued until not on Thursday, but the evening on Wednesday, and continued until the evening on Thursday. Jesus was crucified during the day on Thursday. That was when it happened. He died, and it was still daylight We know this because the skies turned dark for a period of time. That's not going to be so impressive if it's at nighttime. Okay, this happens during the day. So it was on the 14th day of the month that this was done, and this was on Thursday. The first day of the week was the 10th day of the month. Jesus arrived in Bethany 6 days before the Passover on the 8th day of the month. And that's what's recorded here in John chapter 12, verse 1. So he stayed in Bethany for the Sabbath. During the Sabbath, he rested there in Bethany, and then on the next day, after that, the first day of the week, that was when he went into Jerusalem. All right, now I did a complete study on this subject, accounting for the 3 days and 3 nights. You can find it in the radio archive of Living God Ministries. Living God Ministries has the free radio archive, and in there I provided the programs on accounting for the 3 days and 3 nights, and there I give almost 2 hours worth of content that explains this subject as best I can. And this may not be so important to you necessarily, but it is important to a lot of people. Every year that I broadcast these programs around the time of Easter, I always get new people. I always meet new people and discover new people because they hear those programs on the radio and they get excited about the subject because it is important to them. So it is something that you should at least be familiar with, even though you may have no interest in it. You should be familiar with it because you want to be prepared for when you do encounter people who do feel that it is important. All right? So that's how I'm going to address this subject here. Now, for those of you who are using these messages for small groups, it turns out that I do not have a question prepared for this message. I don't have a good reason for it besides that I just simply could not come up with one conveniently, and I just didn't want to come up with one that would obviously be a question that I just sort of came up with, that was not necessarily directly related to the content. So because of the way that I have studied the content recently, all right, and the way that I presented it this morning, I'm just not able to come up with a good discussion question for everyone between verses 51 and 57 here. I'm not really sure that I can come up with a good one that would be directly relevant to this, and so I'm not going to just come up with one just for the sake of coming up with a question, okay? So this is going to be one of those exceptional messages in that regard. I will continue into John chapter 12, verse 2 in the next message. Thanks.